Today we are joined by Mr. Curtis Lightburn. He has previously served as a partner at BCG for 7 years, following his long stints as principal, project leader, and consultant at BCG prior to that. This was following his bachelor's from the University of Pennsylvania and his MBA at the University of Maryland at the Robert H. Smith School of Business. He now runs his own startup, NDG, and that's something we'll learn more about. We'll also talk about his transition from MBA into consulting at BCG and further from consulting to launching his own startup. So thank you for joining us, Curtis. It's a pleasure to have you.
Yeah, thank you. It's a pleasure.
For all the MBA students watching us and the ones who are looking to apply to BCG, what is one advice or suggestion that you'd like to give them to increase their prospects of getting accepted?
So there's two levels, I suppose, to that question. The first one is get in the interview, and the second one is once you have the interview to do well. So I can answer both those pieces. In terms of get in the interview, I would say probably some obvious things, which are do well, score well. Those are things that BCG looks for. What are the scores? And also try to get to know somebody at the company so that you're not just in a stack of applications. So those would be the parts about getting the interview itself. And then getting the offer, I'll talk from a BCG perspective, which is it's really about the case interview. And what I would say is practice. And I think I'm a pretty smart guy. And when I was at the business school, some of the other people in the consulting club wanted to do practice interviews. And I didn't think it was a really valuable exercise. And I will tell you that the first couple of practices that I did, and I was only doing it to be nice to those guys, I was terrible. But then I got a lot better through the practice. And so I did pretty well on the case interviews when I did them for real, but practice really helped a lot.
That's lovely. Is there any specific technical skills that are perhaps more valued than others that you would suggest?
So, again, I'm really going to talk from the BCG perspective versus other consulting firms. So certainly there are going to be some consulting firms who have a very specific focus that a technical skill would absolutely be really, really important for. In general, for BCG, it's about horsepower. Is this person smart? Is this something that they really want to do? Their work is not easy, and so it's not for everybody. And so those are the main things. I suppose if I wanted to talk about a technical skill, the more somebody can understand analytical tools like Excel and all the things that are emerging, that's pretty valuable, as is then understanding of the way technology is impacting the way businesses work. So AI is the thing that everybody's excited about now. But the more somebody is at least conversant, if not familiar, with technology, that's so integral to the work these days. Knowing about that, I'm not talking about writing software, but knowing what these technologies are and what they can be used for and how they work is really important.
Finally, something else a number of students have spoken to me about is how relevant do you feel any of these college societies or clubs that all of these universities have? Do you think a leadership position in any of them is also an asset, or do you think that's negligible? That doesn't make much of a difference. It's all about the case interview.
Yeah. So again, I'll say this the last time. I'm only talking BCG because I don't know what others really care about. For BCG, it's honestly not important.
Not important. All right. Well, thank you.
Now, what I will say is it can absolutely be important if BCG gets a lot of terrific applicants, right? And so to the extent somebody has done something, especially if they've created or started something, doesn't have to be the biggest thing in the world, but they've gone out and done something and made an impact, that really matters, actually. So joining a club or that kind of thing is really not that important, but actually getting out there and doing something, even if it's small, is important.
Perfect. So if moving on to the second question, what was your own professional journey like following your MBA from the Robert Smith School of Business?
Yeah, so I didn't think I was going to do consulting. I had, to be honest, a pretty negative idea about what consulting was really all about. And I can talk about that if you're interested, but consulting wasn't even on my radar screen. But a couple of the professors said, hey, you really ought to consider. And so I did as part of being open-minded and looking at different things. And I'm so glad I did. And so it was a surprise to me that I was even interested in consulting. But that's how I thought I was just going to go back into industry, go back to another technology company, be a CFO or something, and get back on the growth path. But BCG was really terrific. So be open-minded, I suppose, is the lesson I learned.
Well, that's really it's lovely. And but going back to the MBA, the duration of your college, what are some of the big takeaways from there that you think really contributed to your professional career subsequently?
On the MBA itself, you're talking about?
The MBA itself.
Yeah, so on the MBA itself, for me, it may be different than other people. So I'll talk from my perspective that people can decide whether it applies to them. But for me, it was a couple of things. It was a really nice opportunity to step back and take a broader look at the landscape and also at myself. What do I want to do next? That sort of thing. Like I said, I've never thought about consulting before. And had I not been in an MBA program, I never would have been a consultant, most likely. And so it gives you time to step back and look around and look inward to assess what do you really want to do next. And you get to meet people and get exposed to things that you might not get exposed to during your day-to-day, wherever it is that you're working pre-MBA. So those are really the main things. I think those things are, far more important than any specific course content, for example, that you might learn or engage in while you're at school.
If I could request you to dig in a little more into, you just suggested that you would meet all kinds of people, different kinds of people, and learn different things. Now, what are those things specifically that you're thinking of?
The easiest thing to talk about is different kinds of industries, right? And so for me, I had been in telecommunications, media, and technology my entire career pre-MBA. And so in the MBA program, there were people from all different industries, right? And so I got exposure to a lot of different ones, including consulting, right? Which, ended up being my next career path, but also a lot of other industries that I had no real exposure to other than reading about them.
Right. The reason I asked this question is because in recent months and years, I've been reading a lot of commentary on how the MBA, especially after COVID, the online COVID experience of college students, how MBA has become more and more less relevant. Let's call it less relevant, less useful. So, how do you see that evolution? Do you feel it has become less relevant, or do you disagree with that?
So, it depends on the person. So, as I probably came across in some of the things I was saying before, I don't really think that what you learn in an MBA program is that valuable. It's not as valuable as your time or experience that you might get elsewhere. So that part, I strongly agree with what I think you're saying and what you're reading. The thing that I will say does have a lot of value and had value for me is that if it gives you a chance to make a move outside of the lane that you're in. Right. And so if I wanted to stay in TMT for the rest of my life and never do anything else, then I didn't need an MBA to do that. Right? There are a lot of TMT companies that would hire me based on my background. We get over the .com bubble crashing and we go on to the next thing. It's fine. But I never would have gotten a chance to get into BCG if I didn't get my MBA. So somebody who wants to make a pivot, make a lane change, an MBA gives a great opportunity, like I said before, to step back and look at the landscape, but also to get exposure to things and people and companies that you probably wouldn't have had exposure to or even gotten the at-bat to had you not been in the MBA. So again, I don't think it's valuable for that valuable for what you learn in the class in the MBA, but in terms of a life moment to take a step back, potentially pivot or lane change, it can be really valuable. So it depends on what the person wants.
Right. So, for our audience that may not be very familiar with TMT, you're talking about telecommunications and media and technology.
That's right.
Right. So, So, if I could just, I think the main takeaway from this is that MBA is just an opportunity for you to take a step back, like you said, and in case you need to pivot.
That's right.
That's right. Right. So, given that you did finally pivot, what was it that motivated you to launch Breakaway Consulting, and what did the consulting firm eventually do?
Yeah, so Breakaway is, it's little. It wasn't a big consulting firm, so I'm not going to say it was something that I wasn't, but it's a business that I started while I was doing my MBA. And, the simple reasons for doing it was I wanted to have some engagement still in the real world and not just in the classroom. And also, it was nice to have income while I was being a student. So those are the two reasons. And then what work I ended up doing was a variety of things. I had some clients that were small businesses that were looking to get started and they needed help with things like business plan development. So I did a fair amount of that. I also worked with another small consulting firm that did restructuring work, and they brought me into projects that they were working on to help them transform companies. And then the one particular one that I spent the most time with, we ended up taking a lot of costs out of the business, but saving that company from bankruptcy and making it a viable acquisition candidate. So that company lived to continue in another form that it wouldn't have otherwise. So there were a nice combination of plugged into the real world experiences and learnings that I had and income while I was in school.
Right. So this is this must have really complemented the MBA degree. I think it must. It's really complicated. So, what was it that eventually led you to hit pause, and pivot onto BCG? Then, if this was good.
Yeah. So again, it never occurred to me to do consulting until some of the professors said, "Hey, you really ought to consider it." And then once they said that, I started to look into it. So that was the provocation. But what made me want to do it was when I learned more about BCG in particular. I could do commercial if you want me to, but the people there and the kind of work that BCG did was really powerful to me. The other thing that was powerful to me, going back to the Breakaway Consulting, is before I did any consulting, I had a point of view about consultants that they were people and firms that you paid a lot of money to that didn't really bring any newness into your operating environment and didn't get a lot done. And who would hire a consultant? Who would therefore want to be a consultant? That was sort of my attitude. And what I learned in my experience with Breakaway Consultant, we literally saved a company. And while a lot of people lost their jobs in the process, there were still 300 people who had jobs that wouldn't have had them otherwise. And there was a competitive alternative in that marketplace that would have no longer existed had we not gone in there and saved that company. And so you can really have impact in the right context with the right clients, with the right firm, that sort of thing. So it made me a fan of consulting, which I never was before. But that's really what motivated me to do it.
I agree with you. I think there is this image of consultants where they're just very highly paid PPT professionals. If I can,
put together some slides and do a lot of talking, and you got to pay a lot for that, and nothing really gets done. And there are a reason why that stereotype is out there, but something is not always like that for sure, or there would be no consulting, right?
True. That's fair. So following this experience, I think you then pivoted to BCG.
Right.
But before BCG, if I could ask, why BCG? Why not perhaps McKinsey, Bain, any of the other consulting firms out there? How do you compare the one against?
Yeah, so I only really looked at BCG and McKinsey. They were the best, I believe that. And so I interviewed with both of them. I got offers from both, so I was fortunate enough in that sense. And what really made the difference to me was the people. And also I felt like I could really be myself. at BCG much more than at McKinsey. And this is not throwing shade on McKinsey. They're a big, great, famous consulting firm. So they are that. But for me, my sense was there was more of a profile of a McKinsey person, whereas no real profile on a BCG person. There are a lot of different people and who have their own personality and way of working and all that. And I like that because I can be a little bit different. And I also believe that when people get together and there are a lot of differences, that's not necessarily the easiest environment, but it's the best environment in terms of what the potential is. And that's why BCG.
So what I'm taking from this is that BCG allows you the space to exercise your individuality. Is that a fair description?
That's right.
Right. And I'm assuming this is the New York office for BCG.
So I started out in the DC office. I went to. I give you another piece about, I still wasn't totally sold on consulting. So I went to business school in Maryland. And that's where Digix was, also in Maryland. So I started business school, not thinking that I would finish business school, that I would just do a year and then get back into industry, but it turned out to be great. And then I went into BCG in Maryland. So I stayed local there, and then when there was talk about a New Jersey office, which is where I grew up and my wife grew up as well, we connected with people who were starting that up, and I moved up to be one of the first people in the New Jersey office.
Right. So is your entire career at BCG at the New Jersey office following that?
The vast majority of it. So again, the first 2 years were DC, and then the rest of it was in New Jersey.
New Jersey. So, what is the culture like at the office? Is it like you already described part of it? It's open. You're free to exercise your individuality. Any other things that really struck when you joined and when you were part of it?
Yeah. So I would say a few things, probably the obvious. A lot of smart people, got a lot of intellectual curiosity, like to take on problems, figure out what's going on, figure out a better way. So there's a lot of brain power that's going on and wanting to figure things out. So that's part of it for sure. The other piece is, though, like we talked about, there's a lot of individuality and room to be yourself. I thought that was really important to me. And then the last piece that I think is important is that the people at BCG generally are really humble and nice people to work with. And the work is not easy, and people aren't nice all the time because it can be challenging. But in their core, most of the people are just really genuinely nice, humble people and great to work with. And that meant a lot to me.
That seems like a great work environment to me.
It was. It's not easy, and travel is another obvious thing that's not for everybody, but it was terrific for me for sure.
Right. So anybody who is just out of an MBA school right now, gotten into BCG, is at an entry-level position, if they're looking to make it to partner one day, what's some suggestions you'd give them?
Yeah, so these are probably sound like obvious things, but do the work. The work's hard. But and if it's not for you, then figure out something else, honestly. But the work is the first and foremost thing. The related to that is focus on things, and which can mean industries, categories, types of work, topic subject areas, and people that you care about. And so some people care about industries, some people care about particular function, marketing function, IT function, operating. There are functional areas where people specialize in BCG. And then the last part is around the people. And so typically the organization is around teams, and you end up getting really embedded in a client-serving team or a partner-led team and stay with them often from project to project. So find things, industries, subjects, people that you really care about and go all in.
So step one is find your niche, basically, something that you can actually care about so you can passionately really, devote yourself to it.
Right. And not everybody is good at everything. right? So, it's also what you're good at, what you love to do and what you're good at. Typically is a reinforcing function, but it's both of those things.
Are there any specific industries that you feel, given the state of the economy and geopolitics, both of these, are there any specific industries that you feel are going to boom in the near future or are really in demand?
Yeah, so look, I'm a TMT guy, and so telecom, media, and technology continues to be by far the biggest growth engine of advanced economies in the world. So, and that's going to probably be true for all of our working careers, right? I believe. And AI is the latest big thing that everybody is really, investing a lot of time, money, mental space into. So that's one that's big for sure. Others are also pretty substantial. So healthcare, right? Especially as populations age is going to be increasingly important. That's for sure. And then the last one that I would say is climate. And climate, compared to other industries, is pretty small, even though it gets a lot of talk in a lot of circles and in the media. But the growth rate is pretty substantial, and I believe it's a real issue that's going to have more and more business reasons, not just emotional reasons and value-driven reasons, to really put a lot of effort and investment against it. And so I think there's going to be a pretty substantial growth in climate as well. But again, I also would get back to what we talked about before, which is, what's really important to you. And some people would say, I'm really passionate about the automotive industry. Okay, that's good. That's a big industry. There are lots of jobs, so the growth areas are the ones, to me, that I talked about. But I would encourage people to think about, where do you really, what are you really interested in?
You made I'm going to address two comments. One was on AI and the second was on climate. I'll do it in reverse order. In climate, I suspect, and I want your thoughts on this, I suspect there might be more work in terms of mitigation than prevention. Is that
Sadly, it's true. But, honestly, clearly, people, governments are going to be quicker to invest money against an obvious pain point where there is a solution. So to your point, mitigation, right? And in terms of prevention, and I'm a believer that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So get in front of these things before they become disasters that are very hard to mitigate. That's where I am, and a lot of people are. But you really have to have the business logic, because a business and a government is going to be really wary about putting a lot of dollars against something where there may or may not be a financial return. Even though it feels like the right thing to do, people can lose their jobs in government and businesses to say, I'm going to write these big checks because it's the right thing to do. And we could have all kinds of points of view about whether that's a good way to think about the universe or not, but that's the way companies and governments work.
Fair. No, I agree with you. And to my second point on AI, I feel like somebody who has a bachelor's degree in, let's say, the humanities, or a non-engineering degree, a non-computer science degree, and has done an MBA, following that, they want to enter AI. Do you feel that might be slightly harder for them than somebody with a technical background, MBA, AI? Because I suspect AI might require a technical background. Is that a fair assessment?
So, to a degree, and like a lot of things, AI is just exploding and getting massive. And so there's going to be all kinds of jobs and opportunities, et cetera, that are AI related. And some of them, to your point, are going to be highly technical. Can you write software code? Yeah. And I can't write software code. But others are going to be, can you understand how to leverage AI in a business or social or whatever environment in order to create more revenue, make things more efficient, get better experiences or outcomes? And you don't necessarily need to be heavily technical to do that. Having some degree of technical aptitude is going to help, but it's not the same thing as, hey, you need to be a software programmer to get a job in AI. It's not that way.
Thank you, Curtis. So, speaking of AI, with how it's evolving, how do you feel consulting firms are adapting to it? And what are some of the key things some changes that you might have observed in recent years?
Yeah, so, just candidly, I've been out of BCG for 5 years now. And 5 years ago, AI really wasn't a thing. We had machine learning back then, which is sort of like AI, I suppose. But AI really got big in the last 3 or 4 years, right? And so I can only say what I perceive from a distance versus what I experience inside of BCG, but I'm pretty sure what I perceive from a distance and my hypotheses are on point, which is BCG and lots of other consulting firms are doing a lot of work along the lines of what we talked about earlier, which is helping companies figure out how to leverage AI to grow or to reduce costs or change their business model or whatever, right? The automotive company that we talked about, it's not an AI company. They don't understand AI. And so they're going to need help figuring out how can I protect myself, right, from AI displacing me, but also how can I leverage AI in order to strengthen my position, grow, reduce costs, change the way my people work, those sorts of things. So there's going to be, and there already is, and there's going to be increasing work in helping companies leverage new technologies, and AI is the technology du jour.
Sure. Now, speaking of the flip side of AI, one of the key issues that's coming up over and over again is how it might displace workers.
Yeah,
and the rate at which it's improving. I suspect, like many others, that very soon it might have the capabilities to basically replace all the entry-level positions at a lot of the firms, including perhaps the consulting firms. So the analysts and associates, and how do you see maybe BCG might just have partners at some point, 25 years down the line?
Yeah. So I bet against that. Here's what I would say. On a first order basis, what you're saying is absolutely true, which is the work that some people are doing today is going to be done by AI. There's no denying that. And so the question is, for those people or future people who come into that level of role, how can they evolve so that they are doing something that is not displaceable by AI? And basically, it's going to be other things, or how can I leverage AI in order to do my job better and actually be more productive and do potentially different things than I would have been able to otherwise. So like any other technology, automation, that sort of thing. For sure, existing jobs are going to be either eliminated or changed rapidly. And so the workers in those jobs who are going into those jobs need to evolve their game one way or another, or evolve or die, grow or die. I mean, that, to say it in an extreme way. And so I believe that there will always be consultants, there will always be entry-level jobs, but they'll be different. And so people are going to need to learn different skills and different things that they do on a day-to-day basis in order to have those jobs and do well in those jobs, because what's being done today or what was done yesterday, in a lot of cases, is going to be done by automation, AI, those sorts of things. So people have to learn and grow. And people have been doing that as long as there's been technology, which has been hundreds, if not thousands of years. And this is the latest one.
I think 2 points to that. The first one is the concern is that the new jobs that evolve might not be as many as the ones that get replaced. In terms of number, in terms of absolute number, there might be fewer.
So look, right? I mean, I don't think it's true, right? Because if you look at population growth and employment over the course of the last 50 years, every wave of technology that has come in has displaced some existing roles. Yeah, and automation software, those sort of makes things more efficient. So we don't, and where we used to need 10 people to do something, we need 1 or 0. Right. And so that kind of thing absolutely happens, but it's not like, hey, unemployment was, 1% 50 years ago, and now it's 20. It's not that way. So because people learn and figure out, okay, I'm going to do something different. I'm going to do a job that doesn't get impacted by technology. I'm going to, be a dog walker. I mean, I guess there's things like that, but most people are learning, how can I leverage technology in my job so that I have a job that has even more impact than the job of yesteryear without technology, because that's a job that a business is going to pay for. So technology is not going to put people out of work in a broad way. People have to evolve.
And the second point is, do you feel this kind of rapid technological change might be an impetus into something along the lines of a universal basic income? It might motivate more of that conversation, or do you not see that happening?
More of what conversation? Sorry.
UBI, universal basic income. Version of that.
Yeah.
Not really.
I don't think so. This is outside of my domain of expertise, really. And in a lot of ways, it's a political question. And I wouldn't profess to have the answer on it. But in general, like I was saying before about jobs, I mean, I think we're always going to be in an environment where people are going to bring different capabilities to the table in any situation that they come in, have different levels of motivation, have different things that they want to focus on. And in that environment, that's a free market. And some people are going to do well and some people are not. That's just the way it is. And people will have different definitions of what doing well is. And I think all that's healthy. And I think the forces for innovation, competition, differentiation, growth, value creation, wealth, innovation are more powerful than the forces which you could argue are good around something like UBI, which sounds really fair, but fights against these other forces. And I think these forces historically have been far more powerful. We are where we are. And, that is mostly good, but there's some parts that are not. There are people who live in poverty, right? It's part of the way things are. And so, you're going to have those forces competing with each other. I believe that these forces will continue to be bigger and carry the equation. And we'll see, but, maybe not.
Thank you so much. So, I think you spent 7 years as partner at BCG, if I recall correctly.
Yeah.
So what led you to finally move on from there into your own startup and your own idea?
Yeah. So, I had done the consulting for very large corporations for quite some time. And I have a lot, and I'm partly like I was, wanting to do something different, but I also have a lot of passion around working with small and medium-sized companies and helping them grow. And the clients, most of the clients at BCG and all the ones that I dealt with, very, very large corporations. And large corporations are wonderful in some ways. But for me personally, again, I have more passion around smaller and medium-sized companies and helping them grow at a nice rate. And so it was time for me to, move from this kind of work environment to this kind of work environment, being on the company side versus the advising side, small and medium with higher growth versus very large with lower growth. Those are the big elements for me.
So I believe you're currently running a startup, NDG. Did I get the name correct?
Right.
So maybe you could tell us a little more about that and what it's aimed at and what's your vision with it.
Yeah, so it's fashion apparel. And so as I was exploring things to do post BCG, I looked at a bunch of different things, serendipitously in some ways. My wife was a fashion designer and was in the process of uncoupling the partnership that she was in. And so she's a fashion designer. She was in partnership with somebody who had factory relationships and ownership. So that's all the production. So NDG doesn't own any factories, but we have partnerships with people who do, or companies in places like India and China and Bangladesh and Mexico, those where fashion apparel is manufactured. And so she was in the process of uncoupling from that partnership with the production. And she said, hey, why don't you come on board, run the company? It's a restart, really, in a lot of ways. And that will give you an opportunity to see a different industry and be in a different role. And I said, actually, that sounds pretty cool. So that's what motivated me to do that.
Is this like a retail thing, or it's a wholesale thing, or how does this work?
I suppose wholesale is the way you say it. So my wife, we are a fashion apparel designer with our own brands. And so our customers are major retailers like TJ Maxx and Macy's and those kinds of companies. Joe Fresh was a client of hers in a prior rendition. So major retailers are our clients.
So if
we design and sell apparel and sell it to the major retailers who then have the retail presence.
So if somebody goes up to Macy's, Fifth Avenue, New York, they're going to find your company's design clothes over there?
That's right.
And is there specific segments within the fashion apparel business that you're targeting in terms of the customer base?
Yeah, so we're more mass market and higher end and lower end. So think of TJ Maxx as kind of in the sweet spot of where we are from our customer standpoint. And so the categories, women's and girls is really where the business got built up in. So dresses, all kinds of that sort of apparel. And then we've recently gotten into men's, so sports jackets, shirts, that sort of thing.
And all of this is designed by your wife?
She's the lead designer, so we have a design team and collaboration, but she's the lead. That's right.
All right. And do you have any plans to expand outside the States, or is this just limited to States at the moment?
So over the course of time, we've had some business outside of the United States. So like I said, Joe Fresh had been a client in the past, is not currently. And so there has been some international, but right now it's 100% United States.
And where do you see this going in the next 5 to 10 years? I understand. I think I recall seeing $10 million in terms of the aspiration somewhere.
Yeah, so there's two things on a strategic level. Certainly, I anticipate a lot of growth from where we are. When I came on board, what ended up happening shortly thereafter is the pandemic hit, which closed all of our customers and closed all the factories that we're trying to rebuild from, and so that's what took the revenue to zero. So it ended up being a restart from there, right? So I believe there's a lot of growth ahead, a lot more growth, I should say, ahead. And one of the places, just generally, because I think we bring something unique to the marketplace, and we're on a nice trajectory, but also we've never done any B2C, so we don't sell online directly to customers for a variety of reasons. But that's something that we'll bring into the overall mix over the coming years. So that's going to be another arena for growth. So I see growth in a number of ways. But what we're also in the process of doing, quite candidly, is combining with one of our international partners. And there's a lot of business logic to combining the companies. And so that's where that is going in terms of the business itself.
For all the students who might be listening to us, are you also looking to recruit students, MBA students and others at your firm, if they're interested in applying, speaking to you about that, perhaps?
So broadly, I would say yes, although the hesitation in my voice is, look, we're in the process of combining and our partner is much larger than we are, right? And so I can't say for sure what the organizational structure will look like. And so we're not in a mode right now in the moment of bringing a lot of people in. That's going to be a function. That's going to, pick back up is probably the best way to say it once we combine, because then we'll develop a game plan for, well, what are we going to do going forward? What are the roles going to be? What are the resources that we need? Those sorts of things. So in the moment, no, but over the course of time, yes.
All right. Now moving on to the next question. The presidential elections are coming up. The climate is political. Yeah, I would be remiss if I didn't ask about that. From a strictly business perspective, for entrepreneurs, small businesses, do you have a preference in terms of either of the candidates who you think is better for business?
Yeah, so I have a pretty strong preference for setting aside the business, the candidate that I think is better. And what I would say is, look, there's a short-term view and a longer-term view to this question. And I think in the short term, there's one candidate who probably will be somewhat better for business overall, but will be particularly good for the top 1% of the population. And so, and that will get a lot more attention than what is going on for the population overall. And this person has a lot more reputation for being a business person. And so in a lot of people's minds, that person is the business person, the other person is the not business person. But what actually is true, and I'm not lobbying for a vote, but the economy, employment, growth of the economy, and that sort of thing actually has done better under Democratic presidents than Republican presidents historically. And so while you think of Republicans as being more business friendly, tax cutting, and that sort of thing, there are puts and takes in a lot of these equations. And so, it doesn't always play out in the workplace like, you think it should based on the arguments that are made. For sure, I think one candidate will definitely help the richest of the rich. There's no question about that. That's what happened in that candidate's prior term. And what I would say for me is I'm fiscally conservative and socially liberal, so I'm not really affiliated with either party. But that's a bit of a long-winded, windy way of what I think about the business impact of either of these presidents.
Yeah, I really loved the description: fiscally conservative and socially liberal. I think this is. I think a lot of my viewers feel the same way, and they just have no home.
See, and it's interesting that and in some ways, I'm glad and sad that you say that, because I talk to my friends all the time, and I want to, like, why are there not candidates that are like me? Right? I want small government. I want lower taxes. Those things are good. But I also want people to have freedom to live their lives the way they want to live them. Okay, why don't we? And so why there are not more candidates like that is something that I've never figured out. But to your point, I think it's sad, at least in this country, there really aren't choices that are like that.
I believe you're based in New York at the moment, right? You're speaking from New York?
Outside of New York, so living in New Jersey.
New Jersey. So is there any specific government policy or program that you would like to see reformed or introduced in the upcoming 4 years that you think would be really helpful for the business community, just from business perspective?
So the short answer is no. And that's really because I'm not, again, that's outside of my domain expertise, so I'm not going to, pontificate on things that I really don't know about. But what I would say, broadly, is that I believe from a tax perspective, there's not just the social equity arguments that are always made. I think there's a lot of business logic to making sure that if there are going to be tax adjustments, that the benefits flow to the bulk of the population, not the bulk of the income, which is in a very small percentage of the people. Because if it flows to the bulk of the population, then those people have a lot more capacity to buy things, to invest in themselves and things like education and that sort of thing, and be contributors to society. I'm getting a lot more people participating that way. And I think that's probably, I'm hypothesizing now, I think that's probably why the economy has done better under Democratic presidencies than under Republican presidencies, at least in the United States. So that's one. So what is going on with the taxes is part of it. The other thing that I would say is, well, I'm a fan of smaller government, so tax cuts are great. Smaller government, I do believe there are some things that the government can invest in that are hard for the private sector to fully carry by itself. And the two things are climate and education. And so if I were president, or if I could, provide some, I would love to see as much resource as possible go into education and climate. Because, not just because those things sound nice, and wouldn't it be wonderful if our planet was, not that hot and, more people had a good education, but both of those things, in my view, education is easier to understand, deliver great returns on investment. Because if you have an educated population, it goes back to our conversation about AI. If you have smarter people with more capabilities, those people are going to be productive. The more education that they have, if they don't have that much education, they're at risk of being displaced, unemployed by automation, AI, technology, that sort of thing. So we want our people to be as educated and capable as possible. And on the climate, I believe the costs of climate change are massive. And so if there is investment that can prevent further damage, hurricanes, all these other kinds of things, it's not just about, I like to ski, so I wish, ski areas had better conditions, but hurricanes and those kinds of climate-driven disruptions are really, really impactful. They kill a lot of people. They cause trillions of dollars of damage. And so individual companies are going to have a hard time making enough of a dent in the drivers in order to get the return. But government is big enough that maybe we can bring things down through emissions and that sort of thing. So there's business logic around these things. And so I believe if it's done in the right way, and that's a big if, right? That kind of investment can not only make the world a nicer place to live in, but also can drive economic growth.
This is absolutely on point, I think. And, but unfortunately, I think the trend in the last 60, 70 years since the end of the Second World War has been that the middle class has consistently become narrower and narrower.
Yeah,
it's consistently being squeezed. So
no question. And also probably familiar that the Gini index is also going up in the United States. Historically, pretty good on the Gini index versus a lot of other parts of the world, but getting less good. So rich are getting richer in the United States, and the middle and lower are having a tougher and tougher time.
I think there's Professor Amartya Sen, who was in conversation recently, just a very recent interview, I think about 2 weeks back, where he discussed that the inequality at this moment, I don't recall clearly, but I think he suggested that global inequality, or perhaps it was specifically for the States, is that it's at an all-time high now from the time it has first been started to be recorded.
I haven't studied it that carefully, but if I had to bet, I would say that that's true, both on a global basis and in the United States. And of course, you're going to have exceptions to the rules where countries were ruled by, a despot or a very small number of, very rich families, and that evolved away from that. So you have countries that are exceptions, and I suspect in places like Africa, for example, developing countries, the Gini index probably has gone down, over the course of the last 40 years. But for sure in the United States, it's going up, sadly. And it's going up in a lot of other places as well.
I'll conclude with just something a little lighthearted. Is there any fun anecdote that you recall from your time in college or perhaps at work that you'd like to share with any of our audience?
Fun anecdote. I don't know what's fun to other people. I love spending time with my dogs. That's not necessarily a story. I like to do a lot of skiing. I used to be a competitive bicycle racer even while I was working. So I've done a lot of fun. I don't know if there are fun stories for me to tell. I suppose that would be more of a format for a person to get together.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Curtis, for your time. It's a real pleasure talking to you.